Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sarah Toma, Senior Regional Planner. I'll be your chair today until Chair Linz comes to our meeting. She's running a little behind. So before we begin, I would like to pass it over to our interpreter for today's meeting, who will provide an explanation of how to use the interpretation device or access interpretation online.
Good afternoon. Announcement from the interpreters. And to use interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, the world, and select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app, cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. Headsets are available for interpretation. If you're in the meeting room, please check out a headset from the receptionist in the lobby. Aviso por parte de las intérpretes. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación globo terráqueo y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio, silenciar audio original. Contamos con auriculares disponibles para el servicio de interpretación. Si se encuentra en la sala de reunión, favor de pedir auriculares con la recepcionista en el vestíbulo. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask Tessa, our clerk, to confirm if we have a quorum.
Yes, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Tessa. Now I would like to review the meeting process for both the working group members as well as members of the public who wish to participate. For working group members, when you would like to speak, please raise your hand and I will call on you. Tessa, can you provide a quick reminder on how public comments will work?
Yes, thank you. If you are a member of the public and you wish to speak on any item on the agenda and you are here in person, please submit a speaker slip to me at the beginning of the item's presentation. If you are online and you wish to speak, please raise your hand also at the beginning of the item's presentation. And we will call on those members in person first and then those virtual. Thank you.
Thank you, Tessa. Do any members of the working group have any questions before we continue? Okay. Now we will move on to item number 1, non-agenda public comments. We'll take staff and member comments first, then public comments. Public comments will be limited to 1 minute to ensure enough time to get through our agenda today. First, we will hear our clerk, Tessa, who will give a brief reminder on working group member requirements for filing the Form 700.
Thank you. I just want to remind the members of the working group, the Sustainable Communities Working Group is required to file the Conflict of Interest document Form 700 annually. And if you have not done so, please do. The deadline is April 2nd. And if you fail to file and you become non-compliant, then members of the body will not be able to participate in any future meeting until they have filed this form. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. We will now hear from SANDAG staff, Susan Freeman, Carrie Simmons, Thomas DeFranco, and Lizzie Harvey for a few brief announcements and reminders.
Great, thank you very much. My name is Susan Friedman, and I'm the Climate Planning Manager in the Planning Department. And I'm here today to talk about our Priority Climate Action Plan. As a reminder, SANDAG was awarded a planning grant from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in September, and the first deliverable is due to them on March 1st, which is a Priority Climate Action Plan for the region. We presented this at your November working group meeting and talked about greenhouse gas reduction measures, as well as community engagement opportunities that were going to occur. The priority cap focuses on measures to achieve significant greenhouse gas reductions in the region by 2030 and provides benefits to low-income and disadvantaged communities. So this effort builds on the locally adopted CAPs that many of you have, as well as the regional plan and the county's regional decarbonization framework. For the PCAP, we're primarily focused on reducing GHG emissions from the transportation sector and from buildings. And this is where a majority of our emissions come from. And some of the measures include for transportation, things that reduce vehicle miles traveled, like building bike lanes, having flexible fleet program, as well as having faster transit service and transit incentives. On the other side of things, we're also looking at electrifying transportation, so cars, trucks, buses that are on the road, including municipal fleets, and then for electrifying the built environment, mainly residential buildings, and supporting solar and battery storage. So we've been hosting monthly meetings with the climate and sustainability staff of the local governments, as well as regional agencies and some tribal governments. And we've also held a couple climate table workshops, most recently last month at the public library, where we brought together community-based organizations from around the region, as well as environmental nonprofits and equity-focused organizations, along with local government and agency staff. And so from here, we were able to gain a lot of input on what these priorities should be. So lastly, we're working right now also on a grant proposal for the region that'll help implement several of these types of measures to reduce emissions. And this is going to be based on the EPA's criteria, which is extremely competitive. So we really wanted to provide an update on that. And we expect to be coming back again. This is going to be a several-year project that we're working on, but give you a little update. We're going to provide Carrie with information for the website for where to access materials as well. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have three kind of brief reminders and announcements. The first, you should have all seen this, but our upcoming joint working group meeting that was set to happen that the Sustainable Communities Group was invited to on March 5th has since been canceled. I did send out a cancellation notice, and rather than kind of holding a joint working group meeting as we typically have, instead all of you through the Sustainable Communities Working Group and our Mobility Working Group has been invited we're having jurisdiction briefings on our initial concept. So we've met with some of you before, but if not, we're hoping to be meeting with all of you, all the jurisdiction staff over the next month or so. My second announcement is for those of you who have been participating in the SANDAG Housing Acceleration Program Local Technical Assistance. We have kind of just completed our first year of the program, and we've developed a survey that I'm going to be sending out in the follow-up email. And we'd really appreciate anyone who's been participating or benefiting from any of the resources through the program to kind of fill it out, let us know what you liked and what you didn't, and kind of if you have any ideas for our next phase of the TA program over the next year. We'd love to consider those ideas. And then finally, I just wanted to give a shout out to the city of Escondido, who has just achieved housing element certification back in December. A huge congratulations to them. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Thomas Franco. I'm a regional planner on the Sustainable Communities team. Wanted to remind everyone that the application to our 2024 Housing Policy Leadership Academy is open until next Thursday, the 22nd. We'd highly encourage your staff or elected officials of staff to apply. This free program helps equip participants with the tools and knowledge to address the physical and social factors that sustain a healthy housing market in the region. There are 2 in-person meetings, but the rest of them are online, are virtual, and the program starts in the beginning of March and ends in June. You can find more information about the program under Education and Outreach on our webpage, sandag.org/housing, and the link to the application will also be shared with all of you after the meeting today. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lizzie Havey, and I'm a regional planner on the Sustainable Communities team. One last announcement is today we reached out to the project managers of the HAP Cycle 1 and HAP Cycle 2 grantees to set up individual meetings to go over some updates. So please make sure your staff is aware of those meetings requests that went out, and we'll provide you more information. Thank you.
perfect. Thank you all. Do any working group members have any comments/announcements to share with the working group here today? And if so, please raise your hand at this time. Yes, please go ahead. If you can please state your name and your city.
Hi, my name is Crystal Nahara. I work for the city of Encinitas, and I wanted to share that we are currently undergoing our climate action plan update. We just held our first workshop on January 30th, and there will be several more opportunities to provide input from the public. And if you are interested in learning more or want to get more information, please reach out to the email climateaction@encinitasca.gov. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, I don't see any hands. Now we can, now do we have any comments from the public, clerk?
Thank you. I do not have any non-agenda public comments. I apologize. One hand just literally went up. The original draw. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I thought I had my hand raised. I don't know what happened. It seemed like it got lowered. Yeah, so when we're talking about sustainable communities, we need to be mindful that what's happening in the climate or whatnot, when you guys call it climate change, it's weather modification and geoengineering that is happening above our skies. I sent an email to the clerk that should be giving this information of the current cloud seeding that was taking place at SAPA, which is the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority, that they were doing during the storm and before. You need to be aware of that so that you understand we're not going to have sustainable communities as long as this stuff is going on above our skies, because it's man-made perpetuation of storms and it is causing massive destruction. And the more that we are ignoring that, the more destruction is going to take place. And we're not going to be able to make up for the damage that's done because we can't even do it currently. So it would behoove you to look into it and understand what's really happening, and that it's not just, oil that's causing this. It's not fossil fuels that's causing this. It's man-made weather warfare.
And that concludes the public comments.
Thank you, clerk. We will now proceed to approving the consent agenda, which includes item 2 and item 3. Item 2 is the November 16th meeting minutes, and item 3 is the 2024 Sustainable Communities Working Group schedule. Now, do we have any comments from the public on item 2 or 3, clerk?
Thank you. We have one member of the public on the consent agenda, the original draw. Please go ahead.
Yeah, when we're talking about accelerating housing or anti-displacement, and housing policies, which include land grabs, because SANDAG is going around and looking at the tax values of the land to see if they should purchase it to put density there. And when we're engaging in all of this density, it's actually pushing people out because it's going to make people have to pay more, or, the whole community changes. And so, as we try and promote that, we really need to be mindful of how the plan is actually doing the opposite of what it's supposed to do. And, the whole EPA and their regional climate action planning, again, all of this climate god is based off of propaganda. The CO2 in the atmosphere is 0.04%, and we only, have 3% of that amount that we engage in. And so, I just wish that you guys would quit believing the lie and understand that it's all propaganda.
On the time expired, and that concludes the public comments on the consent agenda.
Thank you, clerk. Are there any member comments or questions on item 2 or item 3? Yes.
So on the calendar, I was just wondering if we might consider our meeting in December to be a week earlier due to the holidays, so December 12th versus December 19th.
Okay, noted. Are there any other questions? If not, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, including item 2, and then maybe make a motion to change from for the agenda calendar to move it from December 19th to December 12th? Apologies, 1 second. Okay, apologies. So, so if we can make a motion to approve the consent agenda, including item 2, and then for item 3 to move it to the next meeting, we would need to look at the calendars. Thank you. Do I have a motion?
I make that motion.
Thank you. And a second?
Second,
Thank you. Oh, do you mind stating your name just for the record?
Todd Phillips, Chula Vista.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify that you are pulling item 3 from this agenda, and this motion is strictly on the approval of the meeting minutes under the consent agenda.
Yes.
And the motion maker, can you verbally agree with that?
I agree to that. Thank you.
Do you need a second?
And then I just need everyone and ayes to raise your hands. Any noes or abstentions? And
Angelita, National City. I abstain.
And could you state your name, please?
Corey Andrews from the Solana Beach.
And that is, that motion passes with those members present and 2 abstentions.
Perfect. Thank you all. And thank you, clerk. All right, now we can move forward to item 4. I would now like to introduce Gregor Schroeder, and manager of the SANDAG's estimated and forecast team, and Sarah Hudson, our SANDAG's data scientist, who will present the draft Series 15 regional growth forecast results at both of the regional and sub-regional level.
Hello. All right, sounds good. All right. Item number 4 is the presentation of SANDAG's draft Series 15 regional growth forecast results at the regional and sub-regional levels for the San Diego region. I am Gregor Schroeder, the manager of SANDAG's estimates and forecast team, and with me presenting today is Sarah Hudson, an associate demographer with SANDAG. Also with us today to assist in answering any questions are Grace Chung from SANDAG and Beth Jaraz from the Population Reference Bureau. Here's an outline of the topics that will be covered in this presentation. First, we will review timelines for the Series 15 regional growth forecast, SCS strategies, and the 2025 regional plan, as well as the collaborative efforts between SANDAG and its 19 member jurisdictions during development of the forecast. Next, we will review some terminology to ensure all participants here today have clarity on the various products, efforts, and requirements. Then we'll move on to review the most recent State of California Department of Finance estimates and projections for the state, as these figures set the stage for what is projected in Series 15 for the San Diego region. We then move into the core of the presentation today, the draft Series 15 regional growth forecast results for population, housing, and jobs. The presentation will then conclude with next steps, as well as provide everyone here today the opportunity to ask questions. SANDAG began work on development of the Series 15 forecast in June of 2022. Today, in February of 2024, after months of working together, we are pleased to share the draft Series 15 regional growth forecast. Official collaboration with the jurisdictions opened in March of 2023, when SANDAG launched a web application enabling jurisdictional review of the preliminary Series 15 forecast land use inputs down to the parcel level. Since then, we have met with each jurisdiction to review inputs and incorporate feedback such that our data best reflects each jurisdiction's general plan information, housing element, annual progress reports submitted to the California Department of Housing and Community Development, as well as projects in the development pipeline during this timeframe. The input review process continued until November 2023, whereafter SANDAG finalized the inputs for the forecast and began producing preliminary outputs that were then subsequently reviewed both individually with jurisdiction staff members and together as a group on December 18th at SANDAG Series 15 Task Force meeting. After today's presentation, we will be presenting again at the Regional Planning Committee on March 1st and bringing Series 15 to the SANDAG Board of Directors this spring as part of a larger regional plan item. We want to highlight the collaboration, effort, and hard work put in by staff, not just at SANDAG, but within each jurisdiction, and helping us to create the inputs for the forecast. SANDAG facilitated 42 one-on-one meetings with jurisdictions to review land use inputs. This was informed using a variety of tools, including an interactive web application, as well as visual and tabular displays to ensure a transparent process. As mentioned previously, we also used the jurisdiction's annual progress reports to identify projects in the development pipeline, which was an innovation for this forecast. Then, once the Series 15 draft results were available, SANDAG staff coordinated and carried out 19 initial meetings with each jurisdiction for one-on-one review of the outputs, as well as half a dozen follow-up meetings. Collaboration serves to strengthen SANDAG's forecasts, and we look forward to 4 years from now, during the next forecast cycle, Series 16, to continue and grow the level of review, feedback, and collaboration with our jurisdictions. Before we get into the presentation, we want to remind everyone of the requirements and differences between the Series 15 Regional Growth Forecast, the upcoming Sustainable Community Strategy, and the RENA allocation process. SANDAG Series 15 Regional Growth Forecast is a demographic and economic forecast used to inform the upcoming 2025 Regional Transportation Plan. Series 15 is the latest in SANDAG's 4-year forecast cycle, replacing Series 14, which was used for the 2021 Regional Plan. The next series, Series 16, will occur 4 years from now, incorporating the latest inputs at that time from jurisdictions, recently observed trends, and updated data sets. We want to note that each series forecast, pursuant to California Government Code 65584.01, maintains regional population growth within plus or minus 1.5% of the most recent State of California Department of Finance population projection. For Series 15, this is the projection released July 19th, 2023. It is anticipated that the next release will occur sometime in the summer of 2024, but that release will not be able to be incorporated into the Series 15 Regional Growth Forecast. Moving on, the Sustainable Community Strategy is a planning scenario that shows alignment of transportation, housing, and land use that supports meeting SANDAG's GHG emission reduction targets set by the California Air Resources Board per SB 375. This is a separate process from the Series 15 Regional Growth Forecast, although it is informed by Series 15 population, housing, and jobs at the regional level. This process has already begun internally, led by SANDAG's Planning Division, and will be discussed at the upcoming Series 15 Task Force meeting to be held February 26th. It is important to note that while incorporating jurisdiction land use inputs that are informed by the 6th cycle RENA allocation, the Series 15 Regional Growth Forecast will not be used for anything related to the 6th or 7th cycle RENA allocation processes. By the time the 7th cycle of RENA begins, SANDAG will be on to the next iteration of the 4-year forecast cycle, Series 16. As shown on the previous slide, SANDAG's forecasts are exhorted to be within plus or minus 1.5% from the most recent State of California Department of Finance population projection for the San Diego region. The graph illustrates, as go DOF projections, so go SANDAG forecasts. As you can see, the most recent DOF projection released July 19th, 2023, used in SANDAG Series 15 Regional Growth Forecast, and shown in blue on this graph, is very different from the DOF projection used in SANDAG Series 14 forecast, released January 10th, 2020. That DOF projection then is itself very different from the DOF projection required for use during the 6th cycle RENA allocation process that was released March 27th, 2019. As SANDAG uses the most recent projection, the differences between Series 15, Series 14, and the RENA allocation process can be mostly explained by the changing population projections from the DOF that SANDAG maintains alignment with. The State of California Department of Finance is the authority for population estimates and projections in the state. The DOF produces annual estimates, much like SANDAG does, in addition to multi-decade projections at both the state and San Diego region levels. The DOF's most recent estimates for the state are shown here. It is estimated that California's population was 39.1 million in 2023, a slight decline from 2022, representing a stabilization of population from the decline experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. Natural change, the balance between births and deaths, of approximately plus 107,000 people was offset by net outmigration of approximately minus 144,000 people, leading to a decrease of approximately 37,000 people statewide. As the map illustrates, California's population remains concentrated in coastal and southern areas, with Los Angeles County accounting for 1/4 of the state population and San Diego County being home to approximately 8.5% of the state population. After decades of steady growth, California is projected to be entering a period of slower growth and eventual decline in population. As is evident in the figure, 2020 was a turning point for the state of California as the state experienced a population decrease. From 2020 to 2023, California's population declined by approximately 500,000 people. Looking towards the future and emerging from this historic trend reversal, the DOF projects that California's population will increase on a moderate trajectory to a peak of approximately 40.2 million people in 2044, and after that, the population will contract to approximately 40 million by 2050. Why is California no longer booming? The answer lies in the two components of demographic change, the natural change and net migration. Here we see recent trends in the components of demographic change, natural change, the balance between births and deaths, and net migration, the net total of people moving into or out of the state, both foreign and domestic. Reading the graph from left to right, we see that as recently as 14 years ago in 2010, California was adding over 270,000 people through natural change, with more births than deaths. This then began to decline, reaching a low in 2020 of about 70,000 persons added to the population due to declining birth rates and increasing mortality rates. The projected trend for natural change is to continue downward. By 2035, the natural change will be a natural decrease, wherein California will have more deaths than births each year, and the decline will continue out to 2050. Migration into and out of the state of California from 2010 to 2020 was negative, a net loss of persons reaching a low point in 2020 of over 350,000 people leaving the state. Looking forward from 2020, projections for net migration are that it will begin to increase, becoming positive in the year 2027, and settling into a relatively flat trend of approximately 50 to 60,000 net migrants, both foreign and domestic, into the state of California each year. In summary, California's population has entered a period of slower growth, which will be dominated by positive net migration. With awareness of these trends at the state level, let's turn our attention to the San Diego region, the Series 15 regional growth forecast, and how it fits within this larger picture. Before we begin, I would like to highlight the Series 15 regional growth forecast one-page handout that is available along with this presentation and the supporting documents of today's meeting. Much of the information presented here today is present in that document in an easily referenced tabular format for future reference. If we only had one slide or just 1 minute to share what the San Diego region will look like in the future, these are the key points we would focus on. Like the state of California, the region's population will slowly increase and peak in the 2040s, then decrease out to 2050. The population will be older, but more housing will still be needed. Employment and job growth will remain strong. Fortunately, we have more than one slide and more than 1 minute today to share. Sarah Hudson, our associate demographer, will do so now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Gregor, for the introduction. We will now review draft Series 15 regional growth forecast results for the San Diego region. This chart depicts population, housing, and jobs projected to the year 2050. Population in the region will increase, peak, and then decrease. Over the next 20 years, the region's population is projected to increase from 3.29 to 3.43 million, gaining approximately 145,000 people. Then from 2040 to 2050, population is projected to decrease slightly to 3.40 million. This trend for the region closely mirrors the state projections that Gregor just reviewed. Population in the region will be older, as the median age is projected to increase from 36 to 42, and there will be more older adults and fewer children. We'll look more closely at the details of population in upcoming slides. The San Diego region is projected to increase both housing units and the number of households over the life of the forecast, especially in the early years as housing units that are already in development pipeline are built. Approximately 200,000 housing units and 170,000 households will be added. More housing units allows for the number of households to increase by alleviating existing unmet housing need and allowing more individuals to form their own household. Additionally, older adults are more likely to live alone or with fewer persons in their household, leading to more households with fewer persons in each one as the population ages. The region is projected to add jobs through 2050 due to a stable prime working age population and rising labor force participation. There are two categories of jobs, wage and salary and non-wage and salary. Wage and salary jobs are tied more to jurisdiction inputs and to land uses, as these jobs tend to be associated with employers with physical workplace locations. In contrast, non-wage and salary jobs, such as within the gig economy or self-employed, are more tied to population. Combined, they equal total jobs. In this chart, wage and salary jobs are shown separately from total jobs to aid comparison with jurisdiction level wage and salary figures later in our presentation. It's important to note we're presenting jobs, not workers, and that workers may have more than one job. Let's now turn our attention to demographic details of how the region's population will change over time. Presented here are the components of change for the San Diego region. As mentioned earlier, population change is composed of births, deaths, and migration. Notice the trends shown here for the San Diego region closely mirror the trends for the state because regional projections are guided by and tied to state projections. Reading the graph from left to right, 14 years ago in 2010, the San Diego region added 25,000 people to the population. Then natural change declined by half between 2010 and 2020 to 12,500 persons added annually. As with state trends, the primary factors for this are declining birth rates and stalled life expectancy gains. Natural change is projected to continue downward, and by 2038, the region will have more deaths than births each year. If population were left to these natural factors alone, the San Diego region is projected to decline thousands of people each year. But migration also affects population. Net migration into the San Diego region was positive in 2010, declined to a net loss of persons annually from 2014 onward. Net migration is projected to remain negative until 2025, rise between 25 and 2030, peak in 2030, and then decrease to nearly zero by 2050. We've discussed how the number of people living in the San Diego region will change over time. Now let's take a closer look at their characteristics of who those people will be. This slide presents a population pyramid. It represents how a population changes over time. Males are depicted on the left, females on the right. Youngest age is at the bottom, oldest age is at the top. For example, the bottom leftmost bar is males under age 5, whereas the top rightmost bar is females 85 and older, and the length of the bar represents how many people are in that age group. I'd like to draw your attention to age groups where the blue bar extends beyond the black outline bar. And this means that 2022 is larger than 2050. So these are primarily on the bottom of the pyramid in the younger ages. Therefore, these younger age groups decrease in the future. That's the case from birth through age 29 for both males and females, as you can see in the pyramid. Conversely, notice age groups where the black outline bar extends beyond the blue bar. This means 2050 is larger than 2022. These are primarily at the top of the pyramid in the older ages. Therefore, older ages groups increase in the future. This is the case for ages 60 and above, and the pattern is particularly dramatic in the oldest ages at the top of the pyramid. In summary, this population pyramid illustrates the aging population of the San Diego region. In addition to the population pyramid, it can also be useful to review population by 4 key groups: children, young adults, prime working ages, and older adults. The blue bars on this chart are 2022 and the purple represent 2050. Looking at the youngest age group, you can see there will be fewer children in the region by 2050. Children will decline from 22% to 19% of the total population, and numerically, this will be 94,000 fewer children in the region by 2050. Next, young adults ages 18 to 24 are projected to decline slightly and will comprise about 1.3% less of the total population by 2050. Numerically, that's about 34,000 fewer young adults by 2050. Prime working age adults will be the most stable age group. Ages 25 to 64 remains about half of the total population, which is approximately 1.7 million people. The largest change projected is older adults. Those aged 65 and older will increase from less than 16% of the total population to over 22%. This is 244,000 more people in this age group region-wide by 2050. As you can see, the Series 15 forecast of population in the San Diego region depicts a future much different than today in terms of age composition. And up to this point, we've shared population projections for the state and for the San Diego region. We'll now discuss sub-regional population projections for SANDAG's 19 jurisdictions. This slide presents projected population change for each of SANDAG's 19 jurisdictions. The table on the right displays numeric and percentage population change for each jurisdiction between 2022 and 2050. As a reminder, this information is also provided in the one-page handout that is part of the meeting materials. Of the 19 jurisdictions, 11 are projected to decline population. 3 are projected to increase population by 1% or less, and 5 jurisdictions are projected of population growth above 1%. Another way to examine this information is via the maps. The first map displays population density in 2022. We'll cycle through a sequence of 4 maps to help illustrate where population growth is projected to occur. As 2022 fades away, notice areas of bright orange appearing. These are areas of population growth. Notice clusters of population growth in Chula Vista, San Marcos, along with downtown San Diego, Kearny Mesa, Mission Valley, Sorrento Valley, near the international border, and some other areas. And lastly, the final map illustrates projected population density region-wide in 2050. We'll next look at housing for the region. This graphic illustrates the gap between population and housing growth experienced in the San Diego region. From 2010 to 2022, approximately 191,000 persons were added, but only 81,000 housing units were added. Population was added more than double the pace of housing. Looking to the future, the Series 15 regional growth forecast expects that the gap between population and housing will narrow as population growth slows while housing growth remains strong. From 2022 to 2050, the forecast adds approximately 112,000 persons to the region, but 202,000 housing units. These projections benefit from the collaborative effort mentioned earlier and reflect jurisdictions' housing policies and plans being included as inputs to the forecast. Narrowing the gap between population growth and housing growth is expected to lead to somewhat of a lessening of current housing pressure. It's further reflected in the forecast through decreasing average household sizes and rising vacancy rates for the region, which we will review shortly. Next, we'll take a look at the types of housing around the region. Historically, single-family homes have been the dominant structure type in the region and accounted for over 60% of total housing units as of 2010. The Series 15 forecast, which again reflects underlying jurisdiction inputs, projects that multifamily units will be the majority of future housing growth. By 2050, the 2 structure types are projected to become nearly equally balanced, with multifamily accounting for 45% of all housing units and single-family approximately 55%. Next, we'll take a look at the 2 housing measures that were just briefly mentioned: average household size and gross vacancy rate. The Series 15 forecast projects somewhat of a lessening of current housing pressure, which is reflected in decreasing average household sizes and rising vacancy rates. And we'll look at each of these individually. Average household size is projected to decrease to 2.46 persons per household by 2050. This is notable and will represent a historic low for the San Diego region. It reflects easing housing pressure and even more so, the aging population structure. Older persons tend to live with fewer persons in their household. Excuse me. As the population of the region ages, there may be even more need for housing units, despite population being projected to grow slowly and even decline. The projection for fewer children in the region also contributes to lower average household size. Gross vacancy rate is projected to increase by a full percentage point from 6.1 to 7.2%. As with average household size, this reflects lessening housing pressure in the region. You may be familiar with owner or renter vacancy rates. It's important to know that we are modeling gross vacancy rate for the San Diego region as a share of total housing stock. Gross vacancy rate includes housing units that are vacant, whether that is for sale, for rent, for seasonal or recreational use, or for non-residential purpose such as home offices or vacation rentals. Gross vacancy rate is used because while the Series 15 Regional Growth Forecast allocates housing units, it does not project the purpose for which housing units will be used. And we'll now look at housing at the sub-regional level. The slide presents population change in housing units from 2022 to 2050 for each of SANDAG's 19 jurisdictions. As with population, individual jurisdictions within the region will have their own housing trends informed by state and region trends. Looking at the table on the right, note that all jurisdictions are projected to add housing units throughout the forecast, but the number of units added and the percentage change that this represents does vary between jurisdictions. 4 jurisdictions have 5% or less projected housing growth. 10 jurisdictions have projected housing growth between 5 and 15%. And 5 jurisdictions, housing growth is projected at 15% or more. It is illustrated in a sequence of maps as we saw for population earlier. The first map shows housing as of 2022. And as 2022 fades away, notice areas of bright blue appearing, which represent projected housing growth. Clusters of housing on the map correspond to areas with the higher projected growth. Cities such as Chula Vista and San Marcos stand out. Also, the city of San Diego is the largest jurisdiction in the region and accounts for over half of projected housing growth. This is reflected on the map in neighborhoods such as downtown San Diego, Mission Valley, Kearny Mesa, and the university area. And the final map shows projected housing as of 2050. We will return now to average household size and gross vacancy rate, which we already covered at the regional level, we'll now share at the sub-regional level. In every jurisdiction, average household size is projected to decline and gross vacancy rate is projected to rise. And this corresponds to the regional trends for these 2 measures we reviewed just a few slides ago. It's important to note again that we model gross vacancy rate for the region as a share of total housing stock, which includes housing units that are vacant, for sale, for rent, for seasonal or recreational use, or used for a non-residential purpose such as home office or vacation rental. And the final topic that I will share about today is job growth at the sub-regional level. Here we present wage and salary jobs by jurisdiction. Non-wage and salary jobs are not presented here for jurisdictions. This is because wage and salary jobs are tied more to jurisdictions' inputs and land uses, as these jobs tend to be associated with employers in physical locations, whereas non-wage and salary jobs, such as the gig economy or self-employed, are more tied to population. And a reminder that we're presenting jobs, not workers, and a worker may have more than one job. As with both population and housing, individual jurisdictions within the region do have their own trends for job growth informed by state and region trends. All jurisdictions are predicted to add jobs through the forecast, reflecting each jurisdiction's inputs and the regional trend for job growth due to a stable prime working age population and rising labor force participation rates. The cities with largest percentage of job growth are Imperial Beach, Chula Vista, Oceanside, and San Marcos. And the first map displays 2022 wage and salary jobs, and we'll again cycle through a sequence of 4 maps to illustrate where projected job growth will occur. As 2022 fades away, you'll notice areas of bright purple appearing, representing projected job growth. Notice clusters in the cities mentioned above with the most projected growth, as well as downtown San Diego. And the final map illustrates projected wage and salary jobs in 2050. And this will conclude my portion of today's presentation. Thank you for your time and attention. I will return the floor to Gregor to wrap it up.
Thank you, Sarah. As we approach the end of our presentation today, this slide summarizes the projected change from 2022 to 2050 for each element of the Series 15 Regional Growth Forecast by jurisdiction. Again, this is included along with more information in the Series 15 Regional Growth Forecast one-page handout that is available along with this presentation in the supporting documents of today's meeting. I would again like to highlight that the Series 15 Draft Regional Growth Forecast has been a collaborative effort between SANDAG and its member jurisdictions. The key takeaways from this presentation are: Series 15 presents a slow growth scenario for the region, mirroring both state trends and the California Department of Finance projection for the region. An aging population structure is projected with more adults and fewer children. Housing pressure is projected to ease somewhat as units are continually added. Continued job growth is projected due to a stable prime working age population and increased labor force participation rates. Next steps, we will be taking this presentation to the Regional Planning Committee on March 1st and to the SANDAG Board of Directors this spring as part of a larger regional plan item. We would like you to share this presentation and the one-page handout provided in the supporting materials to all relevant staff and elected officials in your jurisdiction in anticipation of these meetings, and encourage you to ask if there is anything else needed from us at this time to make that sharing process easier. This concludes the presentation of the Series 15 Regional Growth Forecast. We cede the floor to discussion, questions, or subsequent items. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Gregor and Sarah. And I apologize to the working group and to the presenters and speakers for arriving late. This is a really important item, and it's very deep and broad. I would anticipate we might have some questions, and so I want to open it up to the working group and see what questions you may have. Just simply raise your hand if you do. Yes, Heidi.
Thank you for the presentation. I probably have more of a comment and then one question. The comment relates to the communications around the use of the regional forecast, because while we see that the growth projections are projected to essentially decline out in 2042, that does not equate to the need for housing. And I want to just more of a comment. I want to make sure that SANDAG is working together with the jurisdictions to effectively communicate to the public that there still is a great need for additional housing, new housing development, because we have underbuilt for so many decades, and also because we have, a shadow housing market of, people, adult children still living at home, overcrowding, et cetera. So that's my one comment. And then my second comment is, when you're going through the projections, to what extent do you take into account that these projections are the result of people choosing to have less children and leaving the jurisdiction because of the high cost of housing? And do you anticipate that the growth projections could change over time as we make progress to reduce housing costs overall into the future?
I appreciate the comment. The first comment you make, and we are very cognizant of that communication and that strategy. Regard to housing affordability, we do not consider housing affordability into the future, as we do not forecast housing prices. We do take into account a price index measure to inform the allocation of housing units, where areas with historical higher prices are more attractive to add units as they are more profitable. In regards to birth rates and migration rates being affected by affordability, we don't take that into account explicitly, but we do use the rates to guide the forecast. So it's taken into account indirectly. And I really want to highlight, this is a 4-year forecast cycle. So as you say, if the affordability crisis eases and we see more domestic in-migration and we see birth rates climbing back up, that will be reflected in the next Series 16, the next forecast cycle.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions around the working group? I'd just like to add one question. I think of it in terms of, this is not my area of expertise, and that might be true for a lot of people who might bring this back to their communities and try to explain it. This is, I think, maybe a basic question. The question about how is the price of housing driving this, and your answer kind of goes to this, and that is, what is it that drives this? Is it, maybe if you could go back to slide 24, where you compare all the projected changes. Definitely certain communities are changing in a different direction than others. Is it an easy question to ask what drives it?
Yes, so obviously there's the state picture and the region picture, but when talking about the sub-regional picture, we first take the region level population, housing, and jobs, and we use a combination of projects already in the development pipeline, historical growth rates, available capacity from jurisdiction inputs, historical residential price indices, as just mentioned earlier, and travel times from SANDAG's activity-based transportation model to allocate those units, population, and housing down to the sub-regional level.
All right. Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your presentation. So now we'll move on to item number 5.
Excuse me, Chair, we do need to take public comments on item 4.
Okay, excuse me for that. Tessa, are there any members of the public that wish to speak on this item?
Thank you. I have one member of the public, the original draw. Please go ahead.
It's crazy to sit and listen to you guys talking about the population and how it's going to be decreasing. I feel like I'm listening to a Davos meeting and Klaus Schwab or Bill Gates, as Bill Gates would say, that if a vaccine works, there'll be less people. And, you know, I don't know how you guys can sit here and project that kind of stuff, but it's really sad to think about because that is the globalist agenda, is to depopulate, and there will be less people as time goes on. And there's many factors to that. You know, be it vaccines, which are genocide shots, or, you know, all of the weather modification, killing people, so many things. And, you know, it's just sad to hear you talk about this and in such like a callous way. I mean, you know, but SANDAG does that. They talk about a lot of things that are kind of terrifying, really. And, you know, we're never, I mean, why even build housing if we have a projected rate of just total decrease in the people and less children? I mean, what is that all about? I mean, I don't know where you guys are getting this information, but it's like a dystopian future that you're talking about.
That concludes the public comment on this item.
All right, thank you very much. And then our next item is item number 5, Active Transportation Program Cycle 7, Call for Projects. I'd like to now introduce Jenny Russo, SANDAG Grants Program Manager, who will present an overview of the Active Transportation Program Cycle 7 Call for Projects.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Jenny Russo. I'm the Grants Program Manager here at SANDAG. I oversee all of our competitive grant programs. We have 8 of them at the agency. In today's role, I also serve as the Program Manager for the Active Transportation Program, or the ATP. So I'm here to talk to you today about the next upcoming cycle. It's called the 2015 ATP, or Cycle 7. You can kind of use those two terms interchangeably. So as a background for you, the ATP is a discretionary grant program, and it's managed by the California Transportation Commission, or the CTC. The program funds projects that encourage active modes of transportation, that increase safety for bicyclists and pedestrians, that reduce GHG emissions, or advance and enhance public health. So the program also has a really strong focus on ensuring that disadvantaged communities are represented. And there's a lot of agencies that are eligible for the program. So cities, Caltrans, transit agencies, schools and school districts, tribal governments, regional transportation planning agencies like SANDAG are also eligible for the program. So we've held 6 cycles of the regional ATP, beginning with cycle 1 in 2014 and concluding with the most recent cycle, which was cycle 6 in 2022. The cycle numbers, the years, and the award amounts are shown on this slide, which demonstrates an overall investment of about $138 million directly to our region since that program began. You'll notice on the pie chart that's on the right there that the majority of the funding, about 98% of it, has been awarded just to infrastructure projects. And I'm going to discuss the reason for this later in the presentation. So there's over $568 million available in this upcoming cycle. The funding is distributed through 3 separate components, or 3 separate competitive processes, which are shown on this little donut here. And the ones that are in green and blue are the ones that are eligible to our region here. So first is the statewide component. This distributes 50% of the funding, and all of the applicants that submit for it compete across the state for funding. And any project that is not recommended for funding through the statewide competition then competes again in either the pink or the green that you see here, depending on where that region is in the population that's there. So for larger regions like ours, our funding, that second step, is distributed through the regional call, which is what we're talking about today. And the amount of funding that each region receives is determined by their population. So our region is about 8%, as you heard in the prior item, and we were allocated about $20 million for this upcoming cycle. So I wanted to show here the timeline for the first piece, that statewide component that I mentioned. So the CTC is anticipated to adopt their guidelines and their fund estimate at their March meeting, and this will allow for the release of the call for projects. Applications will be due in June, and the funding recommendations will be announced by the state in November with adoption by them at their December meeting. For the regional component, we're starting that process today with this presentation, and I'll be following with the Mobility Working Group in March. The draft call for projects will be brought to the Transportation Committee and the Board of Directors in April, and the CTC will be asked to adopt our regional call at their June meeting. In July, we'll open the call for projects and accept applications until September. And projects that are not selected in the statewide component, as I mentioned, they'll recompete again in our region. So we'll combine those statewide projects with any new ones that we receive through the regional call. And that evaluation process will begin in the fall and last until sometime next spring. And then in March, we'll be bringing the funding recommendations to the Transportation Committee and the Board of Directors, and the CTC will be asked to adopt our funding recommendations at their meeting next June. So kind of a lengthy process. So there's 3 different types of projects that are eligible. There's infrastructure, non-infrastructure, and plans. Infrastructure projects, pretty obvious, those are capital projects. So things like new and improved sidewalks, bike infrastructure, and applicants can ask for funding in any phase of that project. So design, environmental, right-of-way, or construction. Non-infrastructure projects are education or encouragement programs that complement an infrastructure project, or they can be a standalone program as well. And then plans are projects that will develop a community-wide bike, ped, or safe routes to school, or an active transportation plan, but it has to encompass or predominantly be located in a disadvantaged community. It's important to note that the CTC guidelines limit the amount of funding that can be awarded to plans to 2% of that overall funding available. So 2% of the statewide and 2% of the region. The CTC guidelines also require that these projects compete for the same amount of funding, which means there's no set aside for each of these different types. The valuation criteria of each one is different, however, and we'll go over those next. So the regional call uses criteria that are different than what's in the statewide call for projects because it's a different competitive process. Additionally, the region uses projects from or evaluators from volunteers that are in our region specifically, or the statewide component, you might get volunteers from across the state. This slide gives you the criteria that were used for the most recent call and what we use strictly just for infrastructure projects. The most weight, as you'll notice, are for project connection, safety, and quality of the project readiness, and completion of major milestones. As I mentioned earlier, the majority of the applications that are received through the program are infrastructure projects. So these are the criteria that are used most frequently to determine which projects receive for funding. We also know in our region there's a huge need for infrastructure projects. So that's why you see predominantly those are the most projects that are submitted. And that's why that pie in the very beginning showing how much of that funding, that 98%, typically goes to infrastructure projects. On the non-infrastructure side, these are the criteria for those education and encouragement projects. The criteria here that have the highest concentration is alignment with the goals, comprehensiveness, GHG reduction, methodology, and project effectiveness. Historically, we haven't received a lot of applications in this category. The reason for this is a lot of this work is more impactful if it's combined at the same time that an infrastructure project is being built, kind of having the two go hand in hand. So most of the time what we see is someone will submit an infrastructure project with a non-infrastructure component embedded into it. And so that infrastructure criteria is what drives that competitive process. But we do sometimes see standalone programs that are submitted for funding. And on the planning side, the majority of points are for comprehensiveness, GHG emission reduction, followed by alignment with the ATP goals, and demand analysis, which is our GIS component. The criteria and the weights are pretty similar to what we use on the non-infrastructure projects. And as I mentioned earlier, that you can only have 2% of the funding that go for plans. So we don't always see a lot of applications in this category either because they're not as competitive. So today's presentation, just to provide you with an overview of the ATP, if you weren't familiar with it, introduce you to it, and ask for your feedback on the criteria. You're welcome to contact me through the end of March with any feedback that you might have. And additionally, if you know somebody who has experience with these types of projects that benefit disadvantaged communities or safe routes to school, it can help evaluate applications. The state will put out a call for evaluators, usually in conjunction when the call goes out next month. And I'm always looking for folks on the regional side. We usually get about 25 to 30 applications each cycle. So it's kind of a large lift for anybody who needs to evaluate them. So I'm always looking for folks that want to participate in that process. You don't have to do all of them. You can do a subset of applications. So if you're interested or know somebody in your region that's really interested in participating, you're welcome to send them my contact information, and I can kind of explain to them what they'd be signing up for, how much time that takes, and that sort of thing. And so this concludes my presentation. I'll turn it back over to Chair for questions.
Thank you very much, Jenny. It's always good news when there's money.
Yes.
Do we have any working group questions on this item? Yes, Rob.
Thanks for the presentation. Can you tell us whose definition of disadvantaged community and whether that's on the state scale or a regional or sub-regional scale?
So the state has a whole slew of criteria that's used. It's similar to what you see in a lot of state programs. So median household income, safe routes to school, school lunch program, those sorts of things. So we have all of those in there. I think there's 5 or 6 of them. We also have a regional definition in ours, which has to go through like a robust public outreach plan. So it's basically the definition that we use in our regional plan is also in there. So you have a whole slew you can pick from. As long as you meet one, you qualify for it. So you don't get bonus points if you have more. You just need to find one of those.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Yes, Heidi.
For the evaluation criteria, particularly for the infrastructure projects, I noticed that there's the largest percentage, I think, was 20% on safety and quality of the project. And I guess my question is, that seems to be draft evaluation criteria, and what was the thought behind such a high percentage on that versus the demand analysis, which is pretty low?
So this is the criteria that we've used historically in the last several cycles. It's resulted obviously in projects being selected. That's part of the ask today, is if you think it's too low and you think we should raise it, it's something that we can look into and adjust those numbers. Demand is tricky because demand is not in the control of the applicant. So it's really looking at the population, the density, the location of projects. So we try to kind of balance those out a little bit. If you have a project that's located in an area that maybe doesn't have as much of those individual factors, that's the reason why, but we can certainly change that.
Yeah, and my comment on that is that I would think that demand analysis would be really important. We have limited resources and we want to be prioritizing our investments and our funding in the areas that are going to serve the greatest people, which is going to probably result in the highest level of greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So to have it at 7% seems very low to me.
Okay.
I do think safety and quality of the project is important as well. I just don't think it's that much higher, 33 versus 7%.
Any other working group comments or questions?
Sorry, I do have one other question. So I know that there's always the matching funds requirement. I do see it's low at 4%, and I would just, maybe consider reducing that even a little bit further, just to be able to increase participation from the jurisdictions.
And match is not required on this program, which is great. It's there to give points, but I see, yes, reduce it.
I understand. I just, it might be more helpful for that to be a little bit lower.
Sure.
Thank you.
I would like to add in a question about the safety and quality of the project. This is the only place I actually see safety in the criterion. And is safety individual gauge, and is quality separate from that? I'm wondering why they're combined.
Oh, on here? I think I'd have to look at them. I think it balloons out underneath, and safety is one and quality is another. But I mean, they can certainly be uncoupled there if there's one that you think is more important than another.
I see them as different things. And if they're evaluated together, it might be somewhat confusing. Whereas if they're evaluated separately, it might be clearer to the applicants. Another follow-up question as far as safety too is when I think of safety, I think of e-bike safety, I think of Vision Zero. Are those intended to be captured in the safety item as far as criterion?
Yes, it can be. It's also looking at data in the jurisdiction, like crash data and those sorts of things. And will this project help mitigate it? Is there a lack of infrastructure? Are you, correcting maybe something that wasn't designed for today's standards, that sort of thing?
Thank you. Yes, Tara.
Hi, Tara Lieberman, County of San Diego. So I think on your slide, you had said that the infrastructure projects, all phases of the project were eligible. Does that include, going from concept through preliminary engineering and design? So
Yes.
those phases could be eligible?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Anything from conceptual all the way through.
I have a question about that. How does that play into the project readiness criterion?
So project readiness looks exactly at that. Where are you in the project? So projects that are further along will receive
have
more
priority.
points than projects that are on the early stages of it.
Okay. I did have a follow-up question. So I know this is the draft evaluation criteria, and you said that you're taking feedback on that. Is there going to be a separate action or status report on the final criteria before it's submitted?
I can bring it back here so you can all see what it looks like. Certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Very good suggestion. Thank you. All right, thank you. Tessa, are there any public comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair. I have one public commenter, the original draw. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wonder why, I don't know if it's like, and I've asked SANDAG this before, if it's like a build it and they will come type of thing, but we're really concentrating a lot on, the active infrastructure, the walking and the biking, and there really aren't people that are using that. It's not like there's this mass influx and you're just running out of space and more people need it. I mean, there's more drivers on the road, and I know that the plan is to get people out of their cars, but it's like, I don't know what makes you think that people are all of a sudden going to start walking and biking everywhere. Unless they do take our cars, which is the plan, because we can't even engage in the electric vehicles because those too are going to be not, because you have to reduce the vehicle miles traveled. But I mean, we're even using Transnet dollars that is supposed to go for roads on all of this type of infrastructure as well. So, I mean, as you guys sit here and you're doing this, you're also going to be taken off the road. So I don't know if you guys are engaging in using public transit and walking or biking, but you should be practicing what you preach if you're going to be engaging in this kind of business and trying to enforce everybody to do that.
I'm expired, and that concludes the public comments.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move next to item number 6, regional safety planning updates. I would now like to introduce Sam Sanford as SANDAG Senior Regional Planner, who will present an update on regional safety efforts in developing the Regional Vision Zero Action Plan.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I think I'm the last one. I'll try and be as brief as I can on this topic, but it is a topic of passion for many, and it was great to hear safety already coming up in the prior item as well. And there's a lot of link between active transportation and safety. So my name is Sam Sanford. I'm a senior regional planner on the integrated transportation team here at SANDAG, and I am the project lead for the Regional Vision Zero Action Plan. This is a fancy way of saying it's a comprehensive traffic safety action plan for the entire county. I think the last time I was here was about September of last year, and received a lot of good comments at that meeting on the kickoff of this project. Right now we're in the kind of the 50% stage of the project. at that September meeting, I was joined by my colleague who was working on updating the active transportation plan, the regional active transportation plan. Since that time, that project has been paused as SANDAG refocuses on getting geared up for the 2025 regional plan, completing active transportation projects that are underway, and ensuring the Vision Zero action plan gets through as well. A lot of the interim products from the active transportation plan update are being pulled into the Vision Zero action plan because a lot of the data analysis and feedback or engagement were already linked, are coming into the Vision Zero action plan and also into the 2025 regional plan. So I wanted to provide that update right now, and that's a long way of saying that's why I'm sitting here by myself today, and I'm not joined by my colleague. So what's happening with the Vision Zero action plan? A little reminder, this is all about projects, policies, and programs. It is designed or aimed at equipping local jurisdictions to advance safety across the region. Now, some jurisdictions are doing a wonderful job already, have Vision Zero action plans, are running away with this and kind of leading the effort. Other jurisdictions, this effort is designed to help them identify locations and safety solutions or safety projects that then they can then, with identified funding, advance through their programming efforts. One big piece of this is 3 years ago, U.S. Department of Transportation announced a new funding source really aimed at traffic safety called Safe Streets and Roads for All. It is $1 billion a year, at least for 5 years, and it does include planning dollars, which is helping essentially fund this effort. And we also partnered with the City of Vista and the La Jolla Band of Luiseno Indians to develop a city or a local jurisdiction and a tribal plan at the same time. There's an implementation bucket for those funds as well, but there's a significant requirement in essentially a plan that has to meet certain elements. And the Regional Vision Zero Action Plan is meant to be that document. And then once this plan is done, local jurisdictions can point to this document and say, our project is in this plan and therefore it qualifies to apply for implementation dollars under this US DOT Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. So that's the background as to why we're doing this and the big effort for it. That's the element specific to projects, but there's also policies and programs. The updates that I'm going to go through in the next few slides really get into outreach and engagement, and then also some of the data analysis that our consultant team has begun. So right now we're looking at a slide of an event that occurred just a few weekends ago when it wasn't raining, where we were able to go to Santee and test a kit for involvement and getting feedback from the public about different safety projects and how those safety project ideas were kind of landing with the public. And they were able to essentially vote with their preferences with these stickers. It was a nice tactile way for the public to get involved. And the kids really loved the stickers. So it was a good public engagement effort in that realm. SANDAG is going to do a series of these events throughout the region, and staff has also contracted with, SANDAG has contracted with community-based organizations as well to go through their channels to also engage in similar efforts, essentially to get lots of feedback about what types of safety solutions are looking well in different parts of the region, and also it's an opportunity for that education piece kind of simultaneously. So there's going to be in-person events going on. Just a few months ago, we wrapped up a digital engagement effort through our Safer Streets website, where there was an interactive map and people could drop pins and comments about where there might be gaps in the network, where they felt like there could be improvements to the network. And we had nearly 3,000 comments. We're just shy by 30. So we got a lot of feedback that way. And now we're going through the heavy lift of analyzing all that information. In addition to that CBO and SANDAG in-person events, we'll also be going through, we have a local agency project development team, or we meet kind of by sub-regions. We have a north, south, east, and west, where we meet with staff from each of the jurisdictions and talk through kind of more at a detailed level on what this plan and analysis are coming out with. So we've had 2 rounds with them, and we're setting up our 3rd round with that group. We're also obviously kicking off our 2nd round of working group briefings, and then we'll go to our policy advisory committees as well, ultimately getting towards a wrap up in June for the plan. So some of the major products that are under development right now, the first is what's called a benchmark assessment. It's kind of like a maturity model. It's a nationwide standards of what a safety program can look like. So on this slide, we see 5 major categories that the consultant team went through over 3 dozen documents at SANDAG and at some of our partner agencies to see where as a region are we standing in our current practices for safety. And as they looked through these, they found some were either 3 categories. Either they're not a practice, they're an occasional practice, or they're an institutional practice. What this will do is it'll enable really one of the action plan components of this Vision Zero action plan is what do we do next? What are our subsequent steps to advance us on this maturity model in growing in the realm of safety? So this will help us identify what those next steps should be, both as a region and as an agency. Jumping into the data elements now, the consultant team took 5 years of statewide integrated traffic record system, otherwise known as SWITRs. So they looked at 2018 to 2022. With refinements to the location of where crashes occurred, because that's one of the limitations of that data set. So we did a lot of work to update the point information, left the attribute information as they were, and then they started looking through for our region, what are some of the summary statistics that we're seeing with crashes. And on this slide of this draft illustration, starting with the bottom left, I'll just go through a few of them with you, but what we found is 28% of our fatal and serious injury crashes, and you'll see that term KSI, fatal and serious injury. So 28% of fatal and serious injury crashes involve a motorcycle, which is much higher than I think many people think of when they think of major crashes in our region. That 28% that was very similar for both the urban, kind of western third of our region, and also we saw a significant number in the eastern 2/3 of our region on more rural roads. In those instances, we also had a significant number of events where it might be a single vehicle crash, a single motorcycle crash, or it's a lane departure or roadway departure. Moving up from the motorcycle icon there, I think one of the telling stats in this is that pedestrians only make up 4% of all crashes, but 20% of the fatal and serious injury crashes. That gets to that disproportional effect that vulnerable users like pedestrians and cyclists have on our roadway. They're not protected by a steel box. So when there is a crash, they have that higher severity injury when that occurs with them. 66% of pedestrian fatal and serious injury crashes occur in poor lighting conditions. So we're able to take data from the crash reports that an officer fills out when they are on the scene of a crash, including lighting conditions. So we're able to get that. And this gives us, again, information that we can pass along to jurisdictions about what could be done to make our roadways and our network safer. We're also able to bring in some land use components or characteristics. So we found that 34% of fatal and serious injury crashes occur near multifamily housing. And this is again associated with that exposure or how much people are using the transportation system around multifamily housing where it is going to be higher density. So you guys have this. I don't want to go through every single data point for you. We've had a lot of data today, but this is in the presentation as well. The next kind of key deliverable of the Vision Zero action plan is something called a safety focus network. And this is a way of taking something that seems too large, right? We have over 10,000 miles of roadways in our region. That's excluding freeways and ramps. So 10,000 miles, where do you start? So the safety focus network is a way to quickly get down to a concentration of the network that has a high, say, percentage of fatal and serious injury crashes. The consultant team was able to do essentially a moving window analysis throughout the entire region, so all roadways, to get to this piece where they took fatal and serious injury crashes, kind of a snapshot on the network, move it down the network by a small increment, do another snapshot, and move it throughout 10,000 miles. This helps us get to a much smaller portion of the network and really be able to focus our finite resources. So what does that actually mean? So for the San Diego region, the draft safety focus network found that 54% of fatal and serious injury crashes occur on just 6% of the network. So we're taking those 10,000 miles and we're already down to 650 something. But it's a quick way to find out where we should place our finite resources. Of that safety focus network, 59% of the fatal and serious injury crashes involve a pedestrian are included, and 54% of those bicyclist fatal and serious injury crashes are included, and 49% of senior and youth crashes are included. So it's a very powerful way to get to a smaller network that we can focus our efforts. And so let's get to what that looks like. So here we're looking at the entire county, and we can see the stats on the left-hand side. So it's actually 653 miles is the total. And the way the consultant team did this is they looked at 4 different modes separately. They looked at motor vehicles and all the fatal and serious injury crashes, motorcycles, pedestrians, and bicyclists. So they did that for 4 different modes. And they also, since the urban third of our county is very distinct from more the eastern 2/3, they looked at a breakout based on census urbanized distinction and looked at them separately, since the travel patterns, the land use, and crash rates are very distinct between those two, so they were handled separately. So essentially they did this 8 different ways. And then they melded them together into this composite version. But you can see it is spread across the entire region. It does cover, this particular element covers every jurisdiction except for one. So Solana Beach was one. They will have another element that I'll get to in a moment where other jurisdictions will also be included. So I'm going to pan through just at the modal safety focus network, so you kind of see the distinctions here. So realize that this yellow orange is kind of hard to see, my apologies, but this is looking at the pedestrian focus safety network. So this is particularly where those 50 plus fatal and serious injury, 50% of pedestrian fatal and serious injury occurred on our network. Many of these segments actually overlap. So there are segments of our network that were high for pedestrian, bicyclist, motorcycle, and motor vehicle. So there is some overlap. Switching now to the bicycle network, you see that expand a little bit, quite a bit along coast, and then some of the inland communities. Motorcycle, we get more of the eastern county, and then motor vehicle lastly, which is spread throughout the entire region. So those 4 are brought together to make the composite network. And that is one of the key deliverables on this. And then there's another process where this has to get prioritized. A prioritization process is required for that grant funding source, the US DOT Safe Streets and Roads for All. So this is an element that we want to work through. Looking on here, we have 2 parallel processes. On the left-hand side, the regional safety focus network is kind of what I've gone through, like what that network looks like. And we'll get into that prioritization process in a moment. On the right is something we don't have an exhibit for. I don't have a map to show you, but it's the systemic risk factors. And then that will go through a similar prioritization process. So the safety focus network looks back. It's retrospective. It looks at where crashes were in the past over a 5-year period, and then allows us to identify locations. The systemic risk factors is proactive and is trying to identify where crashes are very likely to occur in the future. To do that, the consultant team looks at correlations between features, characteristics, where there are significant number of fatal and serious injury crashes. Let's take a 4-lane roadway meeting with a 2-lane stop controlled intersection. If that has a high correlation with fatal and serious injury crashes, that would be one layer on the systemic risk factors. But we're not looking for one layer. We're looking for a dozen, where there are potentially a dozen higher risk features in one spot. And that's where this systemic risk factor comes in. So we're still working on what that project is going to look like. We don't have a map for it or an exhibit for it, but we do have a draft prioritization process. So first prioritization process, this one is the the safety focused network. It'll take that SFN, if we can use it, make a new acronym out of this. Again, it looks at it separately between urban and rural. And then it takes 3 major, I'm looking at the middle of the diagram right now, those 3 rectangles. It takes social equity, trip activity, and modal coverage. And it takes indicators from those 3, pushes them into an equal area analysis zone, and is able to come up with which areas should be more priority. The top 10%, top 20%, and so forth. That'll go into where we can incorporate community feedback and local plans as we're working through that process, and ultimately give a prioritized list. The intent of this is to help jurisdictions decide on which projects to move forward with. Even though we've refined the network down to 6% of our roadways, for some jurisdictions that might still be a dozen miles. And that's larger than a typical project can take on. So they would need additional information about, okay, of those dozen miles, which intersection should move sooner or be the first one to move forward. So this is intended to help jurisdictions identify those locations and then develop countermeasures or safety projects recommendations from that. Moving to the second parallel process, the systemic risk factors prioritization is very similar. The only difference really is on the far left-hand side, the input is going to be those risk factors. And then looking at the center column of green boxes, we still have social equity, trip activity, but then at the bottom, we're looking at collision trends. And this is where we want to bring in a small amount of essentially where crashes have occurred. So it does look a little bit towards the past, but in a manageable way, where essentially we're looking where crashes have occurred 3 times. So the idea is that if a crash occurred in a location once, that could be a fluke. Twice could mean something. 3 is a trend. So we're looking at that to ground it to some of the history, but that would be weighted less than the above 2, the trip activity and the social equity, to keep it as proactive. So next steps in this effort, we are cruising through this data analysis, but we'll be continuing through the rest of the winter, ultimately getting to the systemic safety pieces that I alluded to just a little bit with the risk base in the spring, coming up with a safety toolkit, essentially ideas for jurisdictions for what types of projects they could put depending on the crash types, the severities, and where that could fit within their jurisdictions as recommendations. And then ultimately completion of this action plan by the spring of 2024. And that time frame is really established by previous notice of funding opportunities from USDOTs. That's what we've tied to. And because of that, we've been working very quickly through this process. Some elements that we're going to continue to work on safety will go on through 2024, but are not requirements of that plan. So we'll have additional opportunities for engagement in later parts of the year. And that concludes my report. I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you for that report. Do we have any working group questions or comments for Sam? Yes, Lynette.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So if a jurisdiction is not included in the network, can that jurisdiction work with you on data, provide you data points, or discuss that with you if it means that that jurisdiction is unable to apply for these funds, if they're not included, is there an opportunity to review that?
I'm glad you brought that up because I think I forgot to circle back on that one. So for a city that is not on that safety focus network, there will be another network that has the systemic risk factors, and that will include all jurisdictions because that's going to be a more broad swath approach. And so a jurisdiction that's currently not on the safety focus network will be included on that one and be able to point to, okay, this intersection or this segment, this corridor is included in this plan, and will then have that eligibility still.
And then will you coordinate with the jurisdiction on that discussion, or where are you getting your data from?
So the data we're using it on the crash side, it's from the statewide integrated traffic record system. Essentially, anytime an officer fills out a crash report, that eventually works its way up to CHP as a clearinghouse for this, and then that's accessible. For many of the other features, we are using regional data sets. So essentially the intent is to have one set for the entire region. So some of the roadway features, roadway geometries is stuff that we're using from the SANDAG data science team, as an example. When we have our local agency project development team meetings, and we've had 2 so far, that's when we get with staff and go into many of the details, much more detailed than I got today, on, you know, where are thresholds, how we came up with certain values, what's the feedback, does this seem like an appropriate level or not, and other opportunities for improvement.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Noah Alvey with the City of El Cajon. On the safety program assessment, I just wanted to make sure for the City of El Cajon, our City Council has put a lot of effort into installing streetlights in our disadvantaged communities, environmental justice areas, as well as doing outreach to our newer immigrant communities that don't really have the experience or knowledge. So I just want to make sure that hopefully we can integrate some of that information where our council is aware of the issue, but I want to make sure that we're casting it in the light of the significant effort that the city's put forth to improve those conditions through those improvements, as well as roundabouts and street calming.
That's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. So what we are looking at how we can incorporate more recent development or projects that either have recently completed, since our window of much of the data analysis is that 2018 to 2022. Some projects might have been kicked off during that time or maybe even completed, but some of the crash data predates those improvements. So we are looking at how we can capture that kind of information to give, kind of highlight that, you know, there might be an element or a segment on that safety focus network that much has been addressed already, but we're still working through those details. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you.
And just as a follow-up, happy to help with any additional information that you might need. And then additionally, if there's public engagement or outreach in the City of El Cajon, if you want to help coordinate with me and I can connect with our media team, that would be great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other working group questions or comments? Not seeing any, then Tessa, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
There are no public commenters on this item.
Well, thank you very much. Item number 7 is upcoming meetings. The next Sustainable Communities Working Group meeting will be held April 18th from 1:30 to 3:30 here in the SANDAG boardroom. At the next meeting, staff will bring a proposed work plan for 2024 to be considered and approved by the working group. As a reminder, if any working group members have suggestions for future topics or items for the upcoming year, you can email Carrie and let her know. And Tessa, are there any members of the public that wish to speak on this item?
And no public comments.
Any other follow-up working group questions or comments? With that, we'll go to item number 8, which is adjournment. Thank you.